All right, in this demo, I'm going to show you a more advanced technique that you can explore with your two current designs. Just for a quick example, let's say I take this great big B and I want to add a drop shadow to it. One way to do that, well, there's a few ways you can do it. You can either go on top of that layer. See how I can turn the layer on and off? I can go on top of that layer. If I double click it, I can highlight it, but let's say I'm on top of that layer. I can go to Layer Style, so go way up to the Options bar. You have your File, your Edit, your Image, your Layer, and then go down the ladder to this third group, and you have Layer Style, and you'll notice how there's something called Drop Shadow. And under that Drop Shadow, there's all these different options. And in fact, I'm going to go over a few of these that you can also explore. So, right now we have it on a blending mode called Multiply, and I want to change it to Normal. Now at this point in this little tutorial, we're not going to get into all these blending modes. I don't want to muddy the waters. Keep it simple. So just remember, put it at Normal, and then notice this. Take a look at the B. See how there's this little gray cast shadow coming out? The reason it's gray is because the opacity right now is at 35%. Now what I'm going to do is put that at 100 so it's black. Or I can bring it down a little bit to like 60% so it's gray. So we have what's called distance. That's the distance. See how far that goes out? Like right now that's 299 pixels, the distance. And then we also have what's called size. Size sort of diffuses it, which is very cool. And then we have what's called spread. That takes the size and pushes it outward. So play around with a combination of those to see what works best for you. Now for my design, what I've decided to do, let's see, is take the size and bring it out like to about 57 pixels. So it's really, really diffused. And then bring that spread in a little bit more. Notice how it gives it depth. Isn't that cool? And this is something you can do to sort of play with that sense of depth within your designs. And what some of you may want to do is go back to the design that we did before, that I demonstrated before, to try to integrate some of these more advanced techniques. So it's good to be exposed to these one at a time so you're not overwhelmed, and then you explore different possibilities. So we have the drop shadow. Another technique I want to show you, I might as well leave that the way it is. So let me zoom in on this design below with the B. Let's say I take that B right there, and then I take the B, instead of having it dead black, I'm going to make it like this lighter version of gray, like that. Okay, so I'm on that layer. I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments. Let's make sure we have that selected. We want to make sure we're on the T for type, and then we go to Layer, Style. I want to play around with something other than drop shadow. So here's the drop shadow. See how I just clicked it? What it did is it applied the same parameters that I applied to the one up above. But I'm going to deselect that, see, turn that off, and explore one of these other options. Now here's what's called stroke. Stroke's cool. So I can take this stroke, and we have what's called inside stroke, see? And then we have what's called an outside stroke, and what that will do is give it a little bit of depth that way. Right now that's 27 pixels, an outside stroke. And you can basically choose whatever color you want. For some of you who want to explore limited color, this might be the time to do it. So we have stroke. Now if I turn stroke off, we also have what's called the inner shadow. Inner shadow. So you just click once and it brings up the inner shadow options. So I'm going to take that and move it from multiply to normal once again. and just bring out that distance. Now look at that. See how it brings the shadow on the inside? That sort of gives it a three-dimensional look, which is pretty neat. So we have the inner shadow. And I can play around with size. I can play around with the what they call the choke. See how it chokes it? We have what's called noise. That gives it a little bit of texture. You don't want to get overly... You don't want to use too many of these techniques because you can sort of muddy the waters and make your design a little bit less clean and clear. It's better to just explore these tricks, these techniques on a limited basis. So the other one I want to show you, I'm going to click off inner shadow, click off that. It's called the bevel emboss. Now this is a neat tool. So I click once, and so we have the inner bevel. See how I add to the depth, and then I can soften that. Then there's the size. That's similar to the one I just showed you, but there are some subtle differences. I like to use this bevel emboss. So we have inner bevel, then we have the emboss. There's the size, soften, and you can play around with these down here on your own to see what they offer. And then we have pillow emboss, which is pretty cool. Soften, size, that brings it way out. And then you can even play around with the opacity of it. And then the screen mode, I want to put the normal. Soften. So there's actually a color option for each of these different selections. I want to put them all at normal at this point in time. So then we also have inner emboss, stroke emboss, stroke emboss. All right, that won't apply. And then the outer, inner, bring that down a little bit. So I want to have a little bit of emboss in this case, but not overdo it. So that's the emboss. Now what you can do, see how this is all highlighted in blue? There's also a contour and texture. So for the texture, you can choose different patterns. Now this is kind of cool. Look at, I could add that pattern. Look at this pattern right there. And you can actually go to here and probably load patterns also. See, load patterns. Let's say you, down the road, I show you how to create custom patterns. You can actually apply those. Now right now, they're coming in as black and white since we're in a grayscale mode. So that's the textures. Let's just leave a subtle texture. I think I like this one right there. It's very minimal. Okay, snap to origin. Okay, there's invert. Scale, so you can play around with the scale of your texture. This sort of gives it a pixelated look, which is sort of cool. And then we have, you can turn that texture off or leave it on. The other thing we can do is we can take this bevel emboss and actually leave it be and actually add a drop shadow along with it. See, I just click once and it brings up the drop shadow options. So there's my spread, my distance, bring that like that, size. So in this case, I want to keep it real subtle because I've got something I want to try. I want to bring that B. See how there's this drop shadow? I want to bring this B on top of the ANCE to sort of play with the idea. Look at that. That's sort of cool, the depth. Now since we're on this tool, I might as well push this idea a little bit further. I'm going to take this T and apply something to it and put the T, or oh, excuse me, the L, an L, and see if I can put the L behind the ANCE so we can have like depth, like that's closest to us to B, second, third. So let's try this. So we have the T for type, clicking on the T, and it looks like, okay, let's first select the right one. Okay, yeah, there we are, the L. Okay, then I'm going to go to Type, Layer, Blending Options, and there's my L. Now let's try to do something with this L. Let's see. We've got texture. I don't want to do that. I think I want to do a little bit of the drop shadow with the L, and then switch it to some bit of gray. So spread, size. So, but before we do anything, let me click once and change the L to something right around here in terms of gray. Okay, now that pulled up that same, if you see how that's like that, now I could take this, switch that, and pull these all in and just rearrange the layers. So there's the A and CE, put that up top. So now that's like that, A and CE, and this one's going behind like that. Now let's see if we can push this a little bit further. So I want to take some of these effects off. So I can turn that, see how there's the eyeball here? Lower right hand corner, we can turn these effects on and off. So there's the drop shadow off, bevel and boss off, and this off, drop shadow. I think I want to turn that bevel and boss off so we don't have the texture, and then bring this down even a little bit lighter in value. Let's go like that right there, so it's real subtle. That's kind of cool. So it's almost white but not white, and then I'm going to play around with the drop shadow a little bit more on this L. And go to Layer, Blending Options, and just see what we can do to create even a little bit more depth. Oh, there's the stroke. Okay, now that's sort of cool. Inner shadow. Now let me bring that distance down a little bit less. There's the choke. I want to keep it real subtle. The inner shadow, but still giving it some depth, but not too much depth. And I can play around with the angle of that shadow. Now notice that it switches the angle on everything. So we have that like that. Now if I wanted to put the L in front, let's see, just to isolate the layers so we can see what's going on with layers. Notice how we have all these different effects. I'm just clicking the FX. Look at, I can turn those off and on. Well, they're still there, but they're being hidden, sort of like sub-layers. So look at, there's that effect. I can turn the eyeball on and off. And then if I don't want to confuse the matter, I can click this little arrow to sort of put all of those together and simplify that layer, because these become like sub-layers. So here's this L, or the A and C. I want to grab the L and put the L up front for now. I think I'm liking this more, the idea of having the L in front. So let's see, right about there. Now let's see, I'm going to leave that just the way it is. So yeah, play around with some of these techniques and see what you can do to give your designs a little bit more depth, visual interest. But remember, whatever you do, don't overdo things. The more I look at this, there's one thing I do want to try. This B, I want to give a drop shadow to. I like this drop shadow up here, but I think it's too much. This B, I want to give a little bit of drop shadow to. So I'm going to click on that, T for type, make sure that's selected, and go to layer, go down, 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 layer style, drop shadow. Okay, and where's my drop shadow? Drop shadow. Show, okay, style, stroke. Oh, I'm on the wrong layer actually. I wanted to be, no, I was on the right layer. What am I thinking? Okay, here, layer, 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 layer. I'm going to go down this way and grab drop shadow. There we are. So just a little bit of depth. Right now it's 41%. I'm going to bring that down to like 40 and then push the size out. See, just a little bit, but not too much. Now this one up here, let me grab that B. See, if I turn the drop shadow off, I want to give it drop shadow, but not that black. So let's see what I would have to do. I want to make sure I'm on the T for type on that layer. You don't have to highlight it. It can just be on the layer with the T. And then notice how you'll have the option for the layer style. Now I go back to my drop shadow, and then I can bring that opacity downwards. And then I'm going to bring the size, that's the size out. It's the distance I want to bring in a little bit. So it's a little bit more subtle. Subtle's the operative word. Okay, right there. So that's it for this little tutorial. Good luck.